Good evening and welcome to ScreenTone Club. This is episode 57 being recorded on the 26th of July 2020 for release on the 11th of August 2020, maybe? I'm not sure. We've gotten far ahead of ourselves at this point, and so I'm going to start releasing these a little more frequently because, oops. My name is Elliot Page, very confused and bad at time, and joining me as always is the ever-punctual, ever-lovely Mr. Andy Hanley. How you doing, Andy?
Yes, I'm doing fine. I mean, is anybody not bad at time at this point in the year? Because, I mean, I don't think anybody is even sure what day it is most of the time, let alone anything else.
Yeah, all I can really do is nod furiously in audio form to that, really. But this is we don't talk about time much because it turns out we're both bad at it, but we talk about manga. We both like manga and we think we can talk about it pretty well. But this is your fortnightly look at manga. We'll focus on during discussion. As a quick note, we have a Patreon. You can support us on Patreon to help defer the cost of all the manga we buy and read for this podcast. Among them is Mr. Rob Jessup, who kindly supports us at the shoutouts tier. So thank you ever so much, Rob. Also, by the time this comes out, will be time to vote once again on our bonus episode, which is available only for patrons, and also voted on by our $3 and up patrons. We have a pretty decent list of stuff at the moment to choose from, and a single vote could tip the tide. But no, moving on to the actual main meat of the show is Returning Champions, where we revisit series we've discussed previously. And I don't think we have anything to revisit this time, do we, Andy? Unless you've got anything you want to sneak in?
No, I don't. I just have all these series boring their eyes into me, saying, "Why have you not read more of me?" So no, nothing for me this time. Yeah, same. There was a recent sale and I kind of went a bit ham, and now I need to actually read this manga, which I think is very unfair. Like, why can't it just beam itself into my head or something? It's so much more convenient. It's only a matter of time, surely.
Yeah, true. Okay, so moving on to the actual main meat of the episode is our picks for this week. Last episode, we both picked out a title to review for this episode, and so here we are. Do you mind if I go first, Andy?
No, please do.
Okay, so my pick is something I've had recommended to me a few times over and was recently on sale, and so, hell, why not? And I think is getting an anime soon?
Yes, I think it has had an anime as of last season, if I recall.
I'm bad at time. This is not being done as a bit. It's honestly me getting confused. But no, I've picked out Toilet Bound Hanako-Kun, a series which is also fun to like mutate the name from. You know, like Kazi struck Hanako-Kun or something. I had some better ideas on Twitter earlier. It's by I presume this is a pen name, but A. Delarue, I think. Published by Yen Press. It's currently incomplete. It's up to 12 volumes in English, with 13 volumes being available in Japan. And you can buy it both physically and digitally. So, Hanako-Kun is kind of a thing that if you've watched enough anime or consumed enough, like, manga, particularly that set in school, you'll have come across as, like, generally being one of the, like, quote-unquote 7 mysteries of the school, or like an urban legend, where if you go to a certain toilet in the school and you knock on the door and you say the name of Hanako-Kun, you'll then see a girl who will then offer you a wish in like, if you give up something precious that they then dictate. And it's like a weird little kid's urban legend. And in this series, it's real, except in this time it's a boy. It's like a little boy in like a old Gakuran outfit with like a sailor cap almost, who is a cheeky little bastard who lives in the toilet and is kind of bound there. But he's the 7th of the 7 mysteries of this school and kind of has taken it upon himself to exist as the like equalizer or the like guardian, but you know, protecting the line between the supernatural and the real humans in the world. And, you know, he kind of gets in scrapes. He meets up with a little girl who kind of comes to him for advice. Yashiro Nene, who is a cutie little patootie who is apparently in the first year high school, although she looks like she's like friggin' 11, bless her. She has the exact sort of visual design of like a magical girl, like before she gets her powers, like, you know, like a Precure or Oremi what's it, Ojamajo Doremi, I think. Is that how you pronounce that? I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, but someone's getting really angry at us because I know we've got some super fans of that series who listen to the podcast, so apologies. But she looks like an unreconstructed magical girl. She's a bit ditzy. She wears a silly brooch. She has funny hair. She's a bit of a dunce. She's really hot for this boy, she's also extremely on the rebound from having another crush. And so Hanako kind of like tries to find a way to say, hey, you probably shouldn't wish for supernatural effects because they can rebound real badly. And it turns out, yes, that in fact does happen. And so she ends up becoming basically like his assistant, his human assistant, in the real world, and she ends up kind of like being a co-conspirator, fellow traveler on his silly little supernatural adventures. And by the end of this first volume, you have a multi-part story, which is already spooling out into being quite intense, about one of the other mysteries of the school, which has gotten somewhat out of hand. My personal bet is that it's Nene's best friend who seems to love taking, ghost stories and making them super gory, which causes problems more than once in this series. But you can't stay mad because she's a funny little ditz. And so, yeah, that's some Hanako-Kun in a nutshell. Initially, I was kind of a bit, not cool on it, I suppose, but kind of, I was more interested in it as like an artistic piece than I was an actual story, because I really love the art in this, and more on that later. But I must admit, it took a while for me to warm up to the characters and what was going on, more than just being sort of detached, looking down on it for 1,000 feet, going, well, this is interesting, but I'm not invested. And I'm not all the way invested, but I did enjoy watching the characters goon around and start to, like, make a small friendship among themselves and start to, like, engage in hijinks, I suppose would be the phrase. But Andy, what did you think? I mean, I must admit, this was my first time reading anything to do with this franchise. I don't know if you've read it before or watched the anime, or what did you think?
So I've not watched the anime. I sort of had a weird one with this because there was a point, must be quite a while ago now, where the first volume came up as like a sort of a bookwalker kind of like quote unquote free volume 1, where it wasn't the entire volume, it was just the first few chapters, like basically like the first story arc. And that was a weird one because I read it as like, oh man, I kind of want to see what happens next, but also just not quite enough, and I didn't have the time right then to kind of pony up the cash to buy the volume proper. But yeah, this is one of those series where I enjoyed it without really having a very specific kind of lineage or thought process as to why. Like, it's just a series where everything it does just kind of hangs together quite nicely. I kind of like all the characters. Like, I quite like the setting. I quite like what it does with its sort of supernatural setting. I mean, much like kind of Inspector, it very much dabbles with the idea of kind of, the supernatural being very much something that is powered and formed and molded by the stories that are created around these supernatural things, and that you can actually change the manifestation of something via the narrative that you spin around it, and all that kind of stuff is kind of somewhat catnip to me. And it's also like, I feel like this is a series that it has some pretty massive tonal shifts at times, even just like page to page, panel to panel, but it manages them all really well. Like, I mean, there's a point kind of, we're about 2/3 of the way through the volume, I guess, that's a pretty big reveal about, like, Hanako's character, which is never quite kind of made clear as to whether that's legit 100% upfront the truth, or whether there's kind of a bit more to it than that. But, like, it's this massive kind of pretty dark moment that somehow still manages to hang around some far more kind of light-hearted, like, pratfalls and kind of the characters being idiots and stuff like that. And it manages to do that throughout, where it has panels and little moments that are quite kind of like horror tinged or have a certain amount of threat to them, and it manages to play that off against kind of comedy hijinks or kind of characters having like snarky one-liners or whatever else is going on, without ever feeling kind of forced one way or the other. And I think that's kind of what I liked about this, is that it manages to do quite a lot with a little, in a sense. It kind of it bounces around in a way that's pretty satisfying and sort of covers a lot of different areas without kind of drilling in too deep into any of them.
Yeah, I think the phrase I have written in my notes before they fuse together because I spilt water on them, but the phrase I have is a goony energy. I don't know if that quite tracks, but as you say, it kind of bounces around, like it jumps around between states. Like, one minute you have characters having a strange discussion about supernatural phenomena, next minute it's a fight scene, which is really well drawn whenever it turns up. But you have fight scenes, and then you have like discussions, and then you have and then you have comedy going on, and then you have like character reveals, as you mentioned, and it all kind of hangs together because the whole thing has this like very rambunctious energy pushing it along, and it's kind of bouncing along, and The art itself, I'm a big fan of, as mentioned. Like it's very layered, and it knows how to draw the eye across the page, and it plays around with its own art styles. Like it will cram loads of different stuff into a page and make it all hang together somehow. Like there's a page which includes like a cameo portrait and shadow puppets and a pair of superimposed hands over all the panels, and the characters kind of laying within those hands within a panel that's nominally in the background. And it kind of does all this stuff. So it has this real intense, like, speed to it where it's kind of turning you through the storyline really quickly because it's packing so much in, but not in an exhaustive or tiring way. It's mostly in the fact that it's just a lot to it and it has a lot to show you. And so it kind of pushes you through all the different states, like character going from lovelorn to laughing to depressed to, you know, everything kind of galloping along and cycling through. And so it kind of maintains this really, as I say, Goonie energy, which pushes it along. And, you know, as you say, it kind of allows it to surmount these tonal shifts really well because it kind of carries a lot of momentum. Like when you learn some character events or things happen, it's not like the series stops and goes, oh, hang on, we better settle this up and we better call to a screeching halt on this. It's like, no, we're going to keep going with the exact same speed we had before, but we're just going to like change tactic and what we're talking about. Like, there are moments which are, as you say, like horror tinged, like, oh, there's what looks like blood dripping here. Oh, never mind, too late. We're already moving on. Shit. And, you know, things are not allowed to slow the momentum of the story, but down, which kind of, as I say, gives it this really kind of undeniable, force, and also helps provide the tension because it's never like it's, you know, it's kind of letting you know that a lot of this stuff is slightly off kilter. Hanako-Kun is not one really to lie about this sort of thing. And so it kind of helps clue you into the rules of the game, as it were. And the entire first chapter is like a really good potted story, one shot of like introducing the main characters, letting you know their level, having some strife, some peril, and then resolving it, but leaving the door open for the rest of the series and letting you kind of enjoy the rest of the ride. And so it kind of goes from there. And as I say, like the story at the end of the volume does get real dark if you sit about and think about it. But because like once it's revealed what's happening, the characters are already in motion, taking action about it. You're not left to kind of drift and worry about it too much because it's just, no, here we go. We got to solve this problem. And I'm already trying to solve it. Like there's no time to have like 3 or 4 pages going, I wonder what happened. It's just, nope, we're moving on. We're solving it. Character is dedicated and moving, even if she's a ditz. So kind of that sort of stuff really keeps the series moving.
Yeah. I mean, the pacing of this volume is certainly, it's weird because like I feel like in other hands, I'd be kind of criticizing it for being 2 mile a minute and not having time for anything to breathe, but like it just works perfectly for this setup because there is this constant like perpetual motion of the characters, and I think which is helped by the nature of all of the characters. They all feel like individuals who are always going to be on the move doing something, like, you know, regardless of what situation is at hand. They're all they all feel busy. And I think that kind of helps to make it feel natural that there's always something going on. There's never really a time to like, oh, this is a chapter where we just sit down and have a cup of tea. Like it's always just like, what's the next dilemma? What's the next stupid thing that somebody's going to do? You know, what's the next kind of mystery that's going to reveal itself? And so on and so forth. And like it manages to get away with a lot in a sense off of the back of that, you know. I mean, even some of its sort of moments of clumsy exposition just feel like they're kind of just important kind of dashed off moments where somebody's just like, yeah, I know who you are, you're blah, 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 like, and then let's just get on and fight or whatever. And it sort of, you know, it carries you along in such a way. Like this is definitely one of those series where there was a point where I just like pulled up the page count of like, wait, how far am I through this? And I was like, you know, good 3/4 of the way through, and it felt like it had been sort of 2 minutes because it just kind of, it has that sort of incessant kind of draw to just keep you going through page by page. And then you get to the end of the volume and it's like, oh, good cliffhanger. Then I guess I want to read volume 2 now just to see where this pans out.
Yeah, totally. It really has that sort of really intense energy of like, okay, you've got on me now. Shit, I'm at the end of the volume. But also like the first chapter where it's kind of introducing all the main cast or the main duo. Like I finished that and pulled up the page count and I was like, oh, this is barely into the volume. Shit. Like, oh God, this series really is like, it's very dense, but also it's very enrapturing, as you say. So it kind of gets it in both the positive ways, where it's both really intense and tiring, but also like doesn't waste your time, which is a hard thing to balance, like having something this fast moving without feeling empty at times.
Yeah,
and I think the art, as I say, is part of that. Like, there's some really fascinating, it doesn't really do the 2-page spread, but it does some really fascinating 1-page spreads, and it knows when to like spend its time showing the supernatural elements, or just showing like the supernatural energy overflowing into reality and also the camera is constantly moving, so even like a toilet seems like a mystical place. Which is probably a hard thing to pull off, given that you're just looking at the friggin' Kazi. So it's kind of intense in that fashion. So as I say, like, it's probably that restless energy to it, like, also kind of keeps going to the art as well as the characters. And as you say, like, the characters always want to be doing something. They always have to be solving something. And so that kind of helps propel the series as a whole.
Yeah. And the character designs and the way they're portrayed is just outright amazing, to be honest, through this volume. Like, I mean, Hanako in particular is a really interesting character, because like that character design can do kind of like sweet, innocent / stupid, but it can also do like incredibly malicious and malevolent, and just like, you know, on the turn of a dime with a slight change of kind of pose and facial expressions, like Hanako can do a complete 180 from being, you know, completely sort of pure and sweet to being something that feels far more kind of malicious and untrustworthy. And the early, actually throughout the volume, to be honest, but the early chapters in particular does a really good job of kind of toying with that. It's almost like a sort of a good Doctor Who-esque thing, where, you know, you need a character that has the versatility to go from like kind of idiot to super serious and like all these modes in between, just like that. And it kind of, that works really well. Like, even like Nene's character and can kind of do likewise, you know, she's kind of like starts out as just being sort of like, you know, ditchy, lovelorn girl, but like she has a certain versatility to her, like throughout that volume as well. And all of that hangs together really well. I think that was the highlight for me, was the character art, but there are also some really great panels. I mean, again, kind of leading into what is the cliffhanger for volume 2, like all of the reveals kind of visually around like the mystery at hand there. There's some really fantastic bits of art there that could kind of, you almost want to pull out and have color versions as just like a poster on your wall or something, because they're just really quite spectacular.
Yeah, totally. It's the sort of thing where it's like, damn, like this should be a poster. And when it does stop to let you drink in an entire page, it makes sure that it's full of stuff you just stare to gawp at and go, damn. But as you say, like, it's the character expressions as well. The art is really impressive. Like, Hanako is kind of a very impressive character in that, like, they have a full range of emotion, but also they have the ability to make a smile look like anything in the world. It's like, it can be like an actual smile, or a malicious smile, a malevolent smile. You know, it can be anything. Like, it's really powerful use of character art that makes him all the more enigmatic. And like, you know, you get that character reveal and you're not quite sure where they sit with it, and they kind of play the both sides of like, hey, do you want to believe me or not? Up to you. I don't really care. So it makes it a really fascinating, like, main character, especially given his like weird little sort of like office as the person keeping balance of things, without taking it like extremely dourly seriously, because at the end of the day he's still a mischievous ghost. So that really helps to kind of, it doesn't help, it's not so much lighten things up, but just make it more sort of like, this is how we're going to play it, and we think this is better for the series, is having both the levity and seriousness around this that it deserves. Yeah,
and it also, you know, manages to use that to kind of leverage the feeling that there's always something a little bit mysterious about that character. Like, again, as I mentioned, there's some pretty big reveals in this first volume that are played in such a way that you're never, because of the very nature of the series and of that character, like, you're never quite sure whether what you're getting is like the honest truth or not. And like, there's some really interesting stuff that I'm kind of curious whether it plays with that more, or whether it just kind of like takes certain facts that have been outlined as just straight up like, no, that's just how it is. Because there's that always that feeling, like pretty much everything Hanako's character says or does, there's always this slight veil of doubt over them, in terms of like, are they actually like showing their hand here completely, or is there actually a bit more to this that they're keeping back for some reason?
Yeah, totally. It's the case of like, well, you might be lying, but for now, it's not going to hurt me if I do believe the lie, so let's just carry on. So it's that sort of stuff that makes it really powerful of like, oh, we don't have to tell you everything right now. We can just do this to move on. Especially given that you have like a pseudo rival character in the mix who is kind of hilarious. Like he feels like he fell out of a baseball manga or something. Like far too short, but also just like, oh, this guy is a sports manga character in this supernatural drama thing. I don't know what's going on. Oh, well, he's funny. So he reminds me of a monkey. So kind of works.
Yeah. There's a great little bit at the end of this volume of just like, you know, alternate ways I could have drawn these characters. Yeah, where kind of Minamoto's character is just like typical kind of shonen fight everything man, and it's like, yeah, that would actually have worked just fine.
Yeah, it's also a really good. Also towards the end, there's a really good boob joke. So that really helps.
Yes.
Also,
yes.
There's also a joke that happened that like is set up, revealed, and finishes in about 4 panels. So another good use of economy of gag, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff would have gotten kind of pretty old pretty fast, but yeah, like it always knows when to kind of drop the punchline on a gag. And again, like, yeah, the art style and the energy with which everything is portrayed just really helps to pull it off as well, because it just makes it all kind of quick, succinct, like, yeah, that was pretty good, and then on we go.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to go and see the anime now if where it is available, because like I'd be really fascinating to see how they like translate the dynamism of this series, because as you can tell, it's kind of something that I was really struck by. So kind of going on from there, like the art, have we mentioned about the art? I really like the art. It's probably obvious. Actually, I had my piece on it earlier, but it really is impressive. Like, it's really crazy impressive how much, like, it just switches styles and merges together and kind of just shows you this colossal pastiche. Like, some of the pages even look like collages in some regard, which is kind of wild. But big fan of the art, and be interested to see if that was done in the anime. But I suppose, oops, sorry, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's quite a versatility to that as well. Like, you know, it has those sort of, you know, kind of sort of shadow puppet moments that kind of like Utena-esque and stuff like that. Like it has a pretty big kind of like palette of styles and ideas to work from as well. It feels like it's definitely a series that is not limited by the artist being like, oh, no, can't draw that. It feels like, you know, they have a strong grasp on like, no, they can kind of pretty much make anything work.
Yeah, and it always feels they're constantly pushing against the boundaries of it, but also like just bashing away at themes and sort of seeing what comes out. And it's like, oh, this is the natural effect of this. Okay, good. Finish it. Put it in. But yeah, I must admit, I'm especially given that this volume ends in a cliffhanger, I'm kind of on the hook to get volume 2. Maybe once my backlog has reduced a little bit, but I'm probably on the hook to read more of it. How about you, Andy?
Yeah, I think likewise, you know, as much as I resisted when I read the initial kind of like tease and wanted to read all of volume 1, and given the nature of its cliffhanger, it's kind of hard not to want to read a bit more of it. And also, like, even beyond that, I enjoy spending time with these characters enough that I would quite like to spend some more time with them. So, yeah, I think at some point I will probably try and dig a little deeper into this one. Yeah,
I mean, it's now like 12 to 13 volumes, and from what I can gather from like glancing my eye over some of the synopses, there are longer storylines and more intense personal stakes that start to come into play. So, but yeah, interested to see what it does with all that. But unless you have anything else to mention, Andy?
No, I think that's it from me.
Cool, yeah. So that's been Toilet Bound Hanako-Kun. So yeah, good. I'm glad to read it. So moving on, I'm really curious to talk about this your next pick, Andy.
So my pick for this episode is going down the light novel track, because I know everybody loves a good light novel, and it is Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, which is basically a series that I kind of came to love via its anime adaptation. Like this was one of those kind of series where I feel like every season I have at least one of these where I don't kind of pick it up and watch it episode 1, and then everybody starts talking about it more and more incessantly, and I'm like, I guess I'll see what the fuss is about, and then I see what the fuss is about, and then I'm hooked. And this was very much one of those series, like when it came about. There's been a subsequent like feature film that is basically, I don't know if it's like the end of the series, but it feels like it should be. And it's all been really good stuff. So I was kind of curious to check out the source material. And having now kind of checked out this volume and like off the back of the anime adaptation, I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts on it, Elliot, because I feel like it's an interesting one to hear a different viewpoint where you haven't perhaps kind of like viewed the adaptation material, which has maybe kind of skewed my ideas somewhat. But anyway, Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai is the story of a teenage boy called Sakata Azusagawa, who is just visiting the library one day, as you do, to pick up a book for his little sister. And for some reason, he runs into a girl who is dressed in a bunny girl outfit, which is a pretty unusual thing in a library. And even weirder and even more unusual is that nobody else seems to be paying any attention to her. And as he kind of like wanders around and kind of keeps an eye on her for various reasons, some pure, some less so, he kind of realizes that it's not just that people are ignoring her, people just like legit straight up can't see her. And for some reason he can. It turns out that she's also a classmate of his, or not classmate, rather, a schoolmate of his. They go to the same school. And she's also like a former kind of, model / actress who's very well known, kind of like around Japan as kind of something of a household name, who, suddenly decided to dip out of the limelight and kind of like take a break from her sort of acting career and sort of disappeared off the grid somewhat just to go and be a normal schoolgirl. And this is all kind of set within the wider confines of a world where there is seemingly this thing called adolescent syndrome, where certain characters effectively, as kind of like a manifestation of puberty of some kind, where characters have these very strange, kind of symptoms and phenomena occur around them, that are kind of very physical manifestations effectively of kind of hang-ups or neuroses that they have about themselves or how others view them and so on and so forth. Like Sakata himself has kind of suffered just such a thing, which is completely unexplained as of this first book. Like he has basically these huge claw marks on his chest that like bleed from time to time, and he has no idea why. His little sister has also kind of suffered at the hands of kind of being bullied at school and is now basically a shut-in who just kind of clings to him. And kind of given that he quickly realizes that my Sakurajima, this bunny girl's problem, is of a similar vein, like basically, and increasingly people around just can't see her. Like, you know, she can go somewhere to the shops and people will just not see her there or serve her or anything. And he kind of realizes that this is some kind of manifestation of her dipping out of the limelight as an actress. So he kind of like takes it upon himself to try and kind of help her out and so on and so forth. And I'm really not sure like how I feel about this kind of light novel version. Like I say, the anime adaptation I absolutely loved, and I think this is very much a case where the anime adaptation is kind of like, I feel like, a greatest hits of this series, because this is a book that has some really good, strong scenes and moments and ideas to it. And I really like all of those kind of scenes and moments, but it also has a lot of things that are kind of frustrating, like, which goes from sort of some of the smaller irritations, like the author just getting way too hung up on train lines and stations whenever anybody's traveling anywhere. Like, it goes into exhaustive details of just like, well, I got on this train, which means that I had to like go across these two platforms and up this particular bridge to get to this platform so that I could get the correct train to go to this station. Which, like, it feels like at some point in his early writing career, like somebody dinged him for just like, well, you can't get a train from there to there. That makes no sense. And he now has this massive hang up that he has to show that he's researched all the right.
Yeah, he's got to show he's working from now on.
Yeah, like it's either that or he's just a big train nerd, which is probably more likely. And it's one of those things where I feel like even if you were in Japan and in the area where it's set, like you don't need that kind of exhaustive detail. And it's little things like that that are kind of frustrating. And it's also a series that kind of gets horny way too often. Like,
super horny! Super horny.
Like there's a part of Sakata's character that I really enjoy where he's very forthright. He just says what he's thinking. He doesn't really care about the consequences. And there's a little bit, I mean, I hesitate to kind of, to go down the cheap route of saying like, oh, it's kind of like, this is kind of a Haruhi-esque series in certain ways, but it kind of is. And one of the ways it is kind of similar is like Sakata's character is a little bit in that kind of Kyon mold of just like going where other people won't tread because he doesn't give a shit about the social consequences. Like he'll happily weigh in on kind of like other people's problems, or just like call somebody out for something where everybody else is just kind of like, not being the nail that's going to get hammered down. They don't want to cause any trouble. He doesn't really care, which ties really nicely into kind of the theme of this book as well. But it also, like, there is also a side where it just way too often it kind of gets caught up in just like, oh, like the girls are hot, like, we need to kind of focus on this, and it loses the focus of what is actually good about the story to go off on those little sidebars that are kind of completely needless, which again is something that the anime adaptation does, but because they're very limited to just like a few seconds and a little kind of throwaway quip or a little kind of cutaway shot, it feels far less kind of invasive than than when you have it in prose. And so, like, it feels like it's a very uneven book for me, where the moments that I love about this are like absolutely fantastic, and it like has some really great, strong kind of emotional moments, and the core of its story is really interesting as kind of like a manifestation of, people's kind of emotional issues around kind of puberty and growing up, that I think it does some really good and interesting stuff with. This is very much a book that drops a massive sequel hook for future books, which again is kind of a thing. Having watched the anime, I'm just like, oh yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, I know where that's going. That's cool. But like, I don't know how that plays outside of that. So yeah, I kind of came away from this very conflicted, because there's some really good stuff in here, but there's also some stuff that I found really frustrating, that I feel like had I visited this first rather than the adaptation, like I would probably have been far less charitable towards it. Whereas here I could kind of hand wave it away. It's like, yeah, well, that stuff kind of sucks, but there's also the good stuff that I really like.
Yeah, to kind of start at the end, I suppose, like, you mentioned the, like, sequel hook at the end, which, I've written many expletives in my notebook about it, because it drops it in quite literally the last paragraph, where it's already set up enough, like, passive hooks for more stuff to talk about, sort of metaphysical and supernatural or not. Like, it's already done quite a lot of its, like, background setting, for the rest of the characters, like Sakata's own, like, wounds and his sister. And then it just drops this massive fuck off thing at the end, which I literally just swore at my tablet reading it, because it's like, you really don't need to do that. This seems really stupid. And then, of course, the author's afterword says, oh, please come back for volume 2. And it's like, how desperate were you to make sure you had a volume 2, like, readership? Like, what is this? I mean, in general, I quite enjoyed the book. I didn't mind the train descriptions quite as much. I did mind the horniness, mostly because it kind of permeates the entire thing, and it doesn't really know which side of the line it wants to sit on, or how much it wants to forgive the horniness, whether it's like using it as a joke, or thinking it's perfectly fine, or thinking it's a problem. Like, it kind of wants to have several cakes and eat them, to use that phrase again, I suppose, where it's kind of trying to do a lot with the horniness of, like, oh, this is the character's thoughts, versus, oh no, wait, he's saying that out loud. And, it's both like mutually destructive and embarrassing to both of the characters. At some point, you just expect Mai to just like rail off and lamp him for being a tit, which I think she does at least once, but unfortunately not enough. It of course does other stuff that's kind of a big, rather than the train thing, it does something else that is just immediate, like, light novel siren noise. Is it mentions Schrodinger's cat, and kind of has an extended discussion on that in a very painful, slow way, which, like, knock it off. Like, anime is not allowed to use Schrodinger's cat anymore. I think we agreed this on a previous podcast almost, because every light novel in anime has fucking done that shit to death. And like my actual general thought of this is I enjoyed it. I like the arc. There's like a false or like a preemptive resolution, which completely got me, frankly, halfway through the book, where I was like, oh, okay, they've resolved it. Cool. Oh no, shit, they haven't. And like, that's like extremely mild spoilers. And frankly, maybe I'm just gullible for being taken in by it, but there is an interesting arc and like peaks and valleys to this story where it's like, okay, here's the problem, here's the rising tension, here's the initial false resolution, and oh crap, and then if it goes. And if anything, honestly, it made me feel a bit weird that the actual real resolution at the end of the book was a bit dumber, and not really as well handled as the initial one. Whereas the first resolution was a lot more personal and interpersonal and quite revelatory for the characters. And then the second one is the like dumb scream it at the school resolution. Which still makes sense and is internally logically sensible. But it kind of like feels like it ratchets itself up too much, and then the resolution is too stupid for me to really countenance it, really. Which I can imagine if you were kind of speeding through that in anime, it'd probably be a bit more bearable as like a natural conclusion to what has been happening to the characters.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I really... There was something that kind of got me about that, the kind of the climax to things, and it is very performative, admittedly, and not particularly kind of smart or intelligent, but I think it's just that it felt very kind of earnest, especially for kind of Sakata's character as just like, well, screw it, I'm just gonna literally kind of, yell at the clouds to fix this problem. It's like, sure, I can totally buy into that. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed all of that stuff. I'm with you on the Schrodinger's cat analogy, not least because it's not a particularly good analogy for the situation at hand. Like, it feels like a really shoehorned in, like, I want to talk about Schrodinger's cat. It's like, it wasn't even a particularly useful place to deploy it. I would have probably been more forgiven if it's like, oh yeah, that's totally, useful here. It's like, kind of not really.
Yeah, it kind of also undermines the character who's describing it, because they're an interesting character who have their own stuff going on. And that's an interesting piece of like weird sort of backstory that turns up in their discussion, but also like that character is also then pivotal to the final resolution in a slightly bizarre offhanded way, that kind of undermines her. And like, when the resolution was coming, I'm like, I don't think you should trust this person if they can't understand what freaking Schrodinger's cat is supposed to be. But maybe that's just me and my like annoyed physics brain or something. My unused degree talking.
Yeah. And again, this is all stuff why I was kind of curious to hear your thoughts on it, because again, like with the fullness of having like watched the entire anime run and kind of like knowing these characters a lot better. It's like Kaide's character is like the little sister as well. Like I feel like without kind of foreknowledge of her deal, I would probably have been way more kind of annoyed with her in this volume. But again, like, she gets her own story arc, like not really a spoiler, and it's like a really, really good, really powerful story arc.
Well, it would kind of have to be given how like, one thing I did like was Sakata. I mean, Sakata's kind of a horny teenage moron, but the one thing I did like was how it brought across how he like had already been touched by these sort of phenomena and how that had affected him. Like, he doesn't have a cell phone. He tries to keep away from the internet wherever possible. He lives to make sure that he lives away from his parents due to family strife of real consequences of what has happened to them. And, him kind of getting in with Mai is a combination of him being horny, but also being like very fearful for her as having been someone who's been affected by these phenomena. Sorry, Andy, I cut you off there, but it's kind of one of these things where like, he's already gone through this stuff and is fearful of more of it happening because he's still living with an active consequence of it. Like, when his sister turned up, I'm like, okay, that's a future volume. Like, rather than Haruhi, I saw it more as Bakemonogatari, frankly, where you have the slightly misanthropic main character who like has a nose for trouble and keeps walking dick first into stupid problems, and then of course gets the wrong girl at the end of the first volume. So there's that. There's my comparison that's going to make even more people angry at me.
Yeah. I mean, the other two kind of like bits of the light novel triumvirate, I guess that, I'd pin out as aside from Haruhi's, like definitely Monogatari, and there is definitely kind of like some of the kind of talking heads moments between characters sort of have a slight kind of Monogatari edge, and the other one is like Kokoro Connect, which is again that's an even more direct kind of like physical manifestations of teenage angst kind of series that I also really, really like for very similar reasons, and they both kind of sit in a similar wheelhouse. But yeah, I mean, I think I think you've kind of you've kind of nailed it with the characters. And I think Sakata's character is interesting because he's not like the typical protagonist of these light novels who knows nothing but just stumbles into these situations. Like you say, he's very keenly aware of the fact that this is a real phenomena that can affect people and it can decimate their lives. And like he's seen it happen to his sister, like above and beyond anything else. And I think that really adds a kind of a layer to his kind of passion and his interest in things that kind of like at least overtakes the whole just like being horny for my angle, because like he has a real earnest like understanding that this is not a thing to be trifled with. This is a really big deal, and like it needs to be resolved, and it's not something she can do on her own by the very nature of the issue she's experiencing. And I think that does add a real power to his character, because he does genuinely care, and he does genuinely care for good reason. It's not just a like, oh, I'm just helpful, I like to help everyone kind of thing. Like there's a good sound basis for him doing everything that he does in this book.
Yeah, it kind of takes him beyond the typical like I'm a meddler main character who just can't help but get involved. Whereas in this case, it's like, oh no, this is important. I mean, I must admit, for one thing, I'm not sure if this was how it was translated, but I wonder if adolescence syndrome is like, you know, the phrase chunibyo, which has now taken on a weird like life of its own in the year of our Lord 2020, where anime terminology has gone stupid, where like, you know, that used to not be a known phrase and is now like known and almost a character trope that people like bank on. If you remember like, you know, Eye Patch Girl from that Kyoani show, whatever the hell.
Indeed, from Chunibyo. But I mean, it's an interesting one, because I if I remember correctly, like the anime adaptation, or at least in like Anaplex's subtitles, just call it puberty syndrome, which is far more kind of on the nose.
But it also makes sense, because puberty does in fact suck, so you can totally buy that.
Yeah, like I feel like that actually kind of works better as a direct, like, yeah, this is just like an extension of all the like nightmarish hormonal stuff you're going through. It's just like this weird kind of supernatural, if you like, version of that, and that sort of that is way more on the nose, but kind of makes more sense than the sort of more hand wavy adolescence kind of thing. But you know, I guess your mileage may vary, and I'm not sure what is kind of the closer localization for the people who are purists about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that because I was spent so long trying to figure out what level of severity it was taking it at, whether it was joking or not, it took me until about a third of the way through the book to actually dial in how serious things were. Which is honestly also about where, like, you start getting his like information about Kaide's deal and her problems. Which, you know, it kind of probably one of the blessings of this is that you get the character saying, you get Sakata like explaining stuff and expositing, but you never get the like exhausting sit you down and expose you to half a chapter of exposition dump.
And a lot of it, I think it helps that a lot of it kind of boils down to like, I don't understand this either. Like, it's not like Sakata's the character that has the magical eye that has the full insight into this world. Like, he's struggling the same as everybody else of like, I have no idea what any of this is or what causes it. I'm really just kind of just groping around in the dark for solutions to these things, because it's like, it's unknowable to me as well.
Yeah, I think, there's a good phrase that he uses at one point, which I actually wrote down because I was quite struck by how apt it was in the moment, which is him saying, all this happened and only the results remained. And it's like, oh yeah, that is how life is sometimes. Sometimes you end up looking down at yourself and going, well, this is what's left. So, you know, like whether it's his chest scar or his sister or everything, it's like, oh, this is what's left. Like you can't point to anything and say this was the problem. It's just, well, that's done. That's gone. So this is what's left now. And you know, it kind of works. Like, I think Mai is an interesting character. We haven't talked about her much, but I like her. She has an interesting arc, unsurprisingly, given that the plot is her arc. But I also enjoy her as being like kind of an aloof character without being exhausting, but also someone who kind of doesn't want to be helped. You know, she kind of actively tries to dissuade Sakata in multiple ways throughout this. And she's an interesting character, partially because it's like, you can almost feel her tiredness of like, well, I guess I'm getting what I wanted, but it's not quite what I wanted, and oh god. So she's an interesting character. She's not a complete maiden, thankfully, which makes her a very interesting character.
Yeah. I mean, she has kind of, they have to play like a very fine kind of balance in line with her character, because she has kind of plenty of agency over things, but the entire kind of plot line of the series is reducing her agency kind of like an alarming rate. And I think it does a good job of kind of handling kind of handling those two sort of conflicting elements really well. So it's not just about kind of, Sakata saves the world and the girl kind of thing. Like, she makes efforts of her own to try and fix things. And yeah, like her tiredness does kind of ring through, like, and I think her character is kind of perfectly written for the scenario that she finds herself in, because clearly, like, there's sort of a tiredness at her sort of career that's sort of been sort of forcibly parked for reasons where she felt like she had to. And, there's kind of her like inner turmoil of figuring out whether she actually wants to go back to that or not. Plus just kind of the tiredness of just this issue that has cropped up and is just getting worse and worse, that she has no obvious kind of recourse to fix, and it's just that kind of exhausting of like, well, I guess I just have to wait until this kind of reaches its natural conclusion. And kind of like seeing, I think it also really helps kind of make her relationship with kind of Sakata kind of pop and stand out, because like from that sort of exhausted, just like, this is a dumb intractable problem that I can't fix. Like, you can kind of almost feel at least some of the weight just kind of lifting off of her from having somebody who's like, one, I believe you that this is a problem. Two, I get it. Like, I get what's going on here. And like just having that kind of sounding board, it kind of like feels like it breathes more life into her, and like seeing that character sort of progress and move through the story is actually pretty satisfying in itself, to the point where sort of, the end of it, the denouement of it all doesn't feel like a really forced kind of, well, we have to end things this way because light novel. Like, it feels like a genuine kind of like, hey, we've been through this nightmare together, so kind of makes sense that we'll still want to hang out, but also like I'm still going to call the shots here somewhat. I'm not just letting you have free reign to do whatever.
Yeah, that sort of like post-denouement sort of like, I'm setting up the rules of engagement here bit was a bit much. Maybe that was more charming in the anime, but it was kind of just kind of tiresome for me, where it's like, man, you wanted to I mean, I know I'm making a lot of direct comparisons, which are uncharitable, but it feels like they wanted the character to out Senjo Gahara in some way. It's like, we've made the ultimate tsundere. Fuck you. Like, oh, okay. I still have some qualms with the resolution, like mostly because I feel like it had better options to end and blew it. But as you say, like, it's kind of really interesting to see Mai's character and such, and also how she interacts with Sakata, mostly because, as you say, like, Sakata is someone who like looks her dead in the eye and says, I believe you, I know there is a problem here, and we're going to try and solve it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's already 3 things more than I was expecting anyone to bother with. So shit. I mean, they do a whole fucking like weird ass like journey into the unknown, like a weird extended date thing, which is extremely cute and stupid. And which, like, afterwards you look back on it and go, man, like, this could have gone real stupid. Like, you two are idiots, but also extremely stupid, horny teenagers. So, what do you expect?
Yeah, and it does also, I mean, again, feels like a very kind of like teenage solution to things of like, let's just run away as far away as possible and see what happens. It's like, the natural solution to everything is like, well, let's just try running away from it and see how that goes.
Well, I wouldn't quite say that like they're actually running away from it, because they're using it to try and like figure out scope, which is a valid troubleshooting step of like, okay, how far does this stretch? Because like, I must admit, like, for the initial sort of introduction of Mai's issue, I was kind of adrift with like, okay, so is this the school, or like what is actually happening here? Like, they kind of talk around it enough where I was a bit confused about how imminent the problem was. So beyond the initial sort of like headline gag of bunny girl outfit. So, which is, a good way to try and introduce your stupid premise, and then have a piece of incriminating material hang around the characters. But yeah, as I say, in the main, I enjoyed it. Like, I didn't enjoy the last paragraph. Fuck you, don't do that. But I did enjoy the general arc of it, mostly because I got caught out by it, which maybe it's just me being gullible, as I say. But it did kind of catch me of like, oh, okay, man, you are going to take this to the edge. So yeah, I came away enjoying it. It's even the trains. Like, it was kind of a good read. Like, I finished it in about 3 sittings. It was kind of easy and fun to gallop through. And even when Sakata's being a bit of a tit, he's kind of more just like, okay, this guy's a moron, but you can tell the author knows that too, so it's fine. So
yeah. I mean, it doesn't outstay its welcome. Like, I was actually kind of expecting, and I mean, it's why I pre-warned you about it. It's like, light novel incoming. Like, this might take a lot of reading, but actually, like, its page count is pretty slim in the grand scheme of things, and it certainly doesn't outstay its welcome. It kind of lasts exactly as long as it needs to. Like, I think I read it in a couple of sittings in the end. But yeah, it's kind of just about right lengthwise. It's a pretty solidly, like, despite my kind of train, like, encyclopedia complaint, like, it's pretty well written for the most part. Like, I feel like it's at least solidly written, if not actually quite well written in places. So it's not kind of a slog to get through of just like, man, these are really bad sentences or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of these things where like the chapter breaks kind of make sense of like, just, okay, here's a nice like break point, like, where they kind of get shorter as it goes because it's having to do less lifting and exposition. But it's a case of like, okay, no, the pace is moving forward and I'm still kind of going through this, and off it goes. Like, it's very easily paced where it kind of gives you things in the chunk size you need. So it kind of like, the cadence of events totally matches up with what you want to read. At least it did for me. It's a case of like, okay, no, this pace is matching my own interest in this story, and so I'm still along for the ride. I might pick up the second one. I think the second one comes out in August, as well as a manga adaptation of this first volume. So it's this one's going to apparently, it has the kohai, the fluffy headed kohai on the cover, so that'll be interesting. Interesting character. But yeah, kind of curious to see what it does next, because due to the way that the end of this first volume happens, it kind of swerves completely out of the way of all of the like background storytelling it's been doing to set up other characters and Sakata's own deal, that's another reason why I was annoyed, because I'm like, oh man, you had like 5 different things set up and you've ignored all of them to throw a new one in. Like, what? Don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting that the way it does that and how that plays out in the light novels. Cause yeah, like, it's not really a spoiler to say like every character kind of gets their arc and like gets their problem examined. But yeah, it's sort of, it throws so many balls up into the air in this first volume. And it's just like, wait, how are you going to juggle all of these? And the answer is kind of, it doesn't. It catches them, puts them in its pocket, and then just throws one up at a time. And that's actually fine. I think once you get through, in the fullness of time, it kind of works out. But in terms of like reading a single standalone volume, I guess it can be kind of frustrating of like, but what about these guys? Yeah,
totally. I mean, it kind of introduces a lot of characters like that. Like the weird, like kind of uncomfortable reporter lady. Like, she's a weird one. I don't know if she'll get an arc. Maybe she'll just be like a Kaiki style character who's like the fly in the ointment. But she was a weird one to come across. So God knows what's going to happen with her. But yeah, what about you, Andy? I mean, because you said, you're a big fan of the anime coming into this. Are you going to continue reading it, or are you kind of good to sit?
I might do. Yeah, I'll see how it goes. Like, cause yeah, like I say, the stuff that this book does well, like I think it does so very well that I really enjoy it. And it was kind of nice to sort of revisit it in this form. So I'm certainly at the very least curious to kind of read more of it. But at the same time, I do also just have the Blu-ray box set sat here, and it's like, I could just rewatch that for kind of just like, the concentrated version of all the stuff that I like about this series and done with it.
Yeah. Do you know how much, like, cause as I say, there's only one volume out in English so far, but there's 10 volumes in Japan. Do you know how much the like anime covers?
I am pretty sure. I mean, I should have looked up whether it's actually finished in Japan, because I mean, like the film that came out like recently feels like it should be the end of the story. Like, it's kind of like it closes a lot of the final sort of loops and questions. And I mean, I guess, it's as such as it's set up that it can always find more characters to do things with, but like that kind of felt pretty final. So, I mean, I'm trying to remember, I think there's like 5 story arcs from the TV series, so I think it kind of like covers all of those. There's certainly like 4 or 5 arcs if I recall.
Oh, okay, yeah, I don't know if it's finished or not, but I couldn't quite glean from my research. Mostly because the light novel DBs I was using was down, so whoops. But okay, that sounds fascinating. But yeah. So yeah, came away kind of enjoying it. I might pick up volume 2 when that actually comes out, more importantly. But yeah, we'll see how I feel, because I kind of came away from it enjoying the cast. Like, it was an interesting enough diversion. So yeah.
So looking it up with a bit of live research, so basically the TV series covers the first 5 books. Like the film is book 6, and then there's 4 other volumes in Japan after that. So there's plenty more rascaling going on.
It does drop the name of the book in at the end, which I feel like is like a lost in translation style thing. But I think Rascal is kind of the best it can do.
I mean, it's been a long time since I've had any need to use the word rascal, so I'm kind of with it for
Rascally Wabbit. But yeah, one of the transliterations on the Backer Updates manga page is the pig in the spring of his life dreams not of an upperclassman in a bunny suit, which feels like the most tortuously overwritten version of that somehow.
Also accurate.
The pig bit is a bit more weird, but yeah, he is horny and snorting around, so I guess. Cool. So yeah, that's unless you got anything else, that's been Rascal Does Not Beat Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai. God.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'll say is, like, for, as much as it doesn't really matter for a light novel, I do really like the character designs through this book. Like, they're all pretty decent. So like the little illustrations are quite nice.
At the risk of sounding like a contrarian, I found them extremely boring. So I was just like, yep, generic light novel art, whatever, moving on. So maybe that's just me. It just seemed like exactly the same as everything else. Whoops. But more than that, we just needed Kaede in more funny pajamas, like animal. They mentioned she has animal pajamas, so show more of that. Come on, like comedy pajamas are important.
Yeah. Again, good. Yeah, good reason to watch the anime. Lots of panda pajamas throughout.
Oh well, pandas are garbage, so nope, not bothering. Cool. So moving on to our picks for next episode. Mine is hot off the presses, quite literally, because it came out 2 days ago at the time of recording. My pick is Volume 1 of My Dad's the Queen of All VTubers? ? Which is freshly out from Kaiten Books. I've already bought it and read it on the day of release, and want to talk about it, so I've put it on my docket for here. Andy, how about you?
So my pick is also hot off the presses in a different way, because the series Shaman King has been released digitally in its entirety, and that's a series I basically know nothing about apart from people keep mentioning it, and usually in hushed tones of like, oh, it's really good. So I figured I'd pick Volume 1 of Shaman King. Now it is available digitally. Yeah,
plus it's all out on like Amazon Kindle Unlimited or whatever the hell. So I've re-upped my Prime to read it. I remember liking the anime. I can't remember a single thing about it, but I remember vaguely enjoying it. So interested to see. I'm very curious to read this. I was going to put it on my own list until I picked up my dumb pick. So there we go. Cool. So thank you very much for listening, as always. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/ScreenTone Club. From the mere sum of $1 a month, you get bonus episodes from us, including the entire backlog. And from $3 a month, you can vote on what we cover in said bonus episodes. Woo, what a deal. And you can also find us on, you can also find us on Twitter at ScreenTone Club. You can email us, show@screentone.club. And we are supposed to be on YouTube by the time this episode comes out. We're starting to try and put the episodes up on YouTube just because, some people prefer that method of media. And so, we found a vaguely low effort way of doing it. So look forward to that soon. Hopefully there'll be at least some episodes up by the time this episode comes out. If not, well, you can shout at me on Twitter. Sorry. The way you can shout at me is at Elliot Page on Twitter. That's where you can find me. Mostly talking about house redecorating at the moment. And Andy, how about you?
I don't know what you want to shout at me about. Maybe my choices in light novels, but you can shout at me at Hannah's1979.
Cool. Maybe I can shout at you about your day job. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't encourage that.
I mean, that happens anyway.
It's fine. True. So, thank you everyone for listening, and good night.
Bye, everyone.